So good evening and welcome to this evening that we want to dedicate to diversity. Welcome to all of you here in the audience, in the auditorium of the Landesmuseum in Zurich, and welcome to everybody who is following online. I'm really very pleased that we were able to organize this evening. My name is Denise Zanella. I'm the director of the Swiss National Museum, and we are here this evening because last year, when I started as a director, I had on my list of the topics that I found that are important to me for the Swiss National Museum, the topic diversity. But then I realized, okay, what does diversity mean? And how can we do this? How can we really integrate diversity at the Swiss National Museum? And when I was preparing this evening, then I thought, let's see what the Cambridge Dictionary is telling us about diversity. And I will tell you in a couple of seconds about it. I just wanted to say that this evening will be held in English. We have a couple of countries here represented, and I really welcome also our guests. We will introduce our guests in a couple of minutes to you, but it's really, we have France, Germany, and Switzerland here. That's why we have chosen English for this evening to communicate all together. And we will speak here on the panel about 1 hour, and then we will have 30 minutes time for your questions and the questions of the audience online. So there will be time also really for discussion. But let's go back to the description of diversity on the Cambridge or in the Cambridge Dictionary. The Cambridge Dictionary says or tells the fact of diversity is the fact of many different types of things or people being included in something, or a range of different things or people, or the fact that there are many different ideas or opinions about something, or the condition or fact of being different or varied, or variety. So it's a very broad word, actually, diversity, and I really hope that this evening will give us the possibility to understand a little bit better what it means and what it means at museums. And the key questions for tonight's conversations for all of us will be: what does diversity mean in the cultural sector, and for museums especially? How can museums dedicate themselves to incorporate diversity not only in their collections, productions and educational work, but also as companies with regard to their management or organizational structure? Then we will also, our key members of a broader social ecosystem, and how they can embrace big societal questions that shape our everyday lives for far beyond the cultural sector. And then we also will try to speak about building bridges also inside of Switzerland, and this evening is really a great example, because last year I met Pascal Hufschmidt, director of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Museum in Geneva, and we discussed about our topics as directors of museums and what we are interested in, and we discovered that we are both interested also in diversity, and you already have done a lot of things in this context. And for me, it's wonderful this evening that we can introduce or begin with a collaboration between our two museums, and that we have three countries here on the panel. So I'm really pleased also about that, and I give you, Pascal, the word now.
Bonsoir, good evening. Thank you very much, Denise, for the warm welcome. Thank you to your team as well for all the work in preparing this event. I'm extremely happy to be with you here this evening, and I acknowledge the presence of my colleagues, Elisa Ruska, who is curator, and Anu Trammot, who is director of promotion and partnerships. And together with the entire team in Geneva at the International Red Cross and Red Crescent Museum, we ask one single question, which we ponder with our visitors, our stakeholders, our audiences. And it's very simple, but complicated question. What does humanitarian action have to do with me in my life every day, here and now? And to explore answers and possibilities around this question, we connect different communities, and we very much enjoy dialogues between humanitarian workers, artists, researchers, and everyday people like me, because we all have conversations about humanitarian principle and news and dilemmas, but we don't have them together. And one way of doing that is to embrace full-on big societal questions that run through these different communities, and to imagine the museum as a forum where we can talk about them. So every year we embrace a big theme, and we've been working on gender and diversity for over a year now, exploring it through our events, our exhibitions, our publications, but also as a company. And one of the key partners in this adventure, where we've learned so much, is Rebecca Amsellem, who is online. I don't know how to connect with you visually. I'll do this. Perhaps you can see me, yeah? Rebecca, who was supposed to be here with us this evening, but then life is full of surprises, so she is with us online. Rebecca, you are a fantastic person. I could start with this, just to put it simply. We've learned so much with you this year. You are also a French-Canadian economist, feminist activist, author, CEO of your own company. And together we've conducted a big research that you are sharing with us this evening and in a series of masterclasses. And I very much look forward to this conversation all together. And along with you, Rebecca, we have two other wonderful speakers. Denise, I'll let you introduce them.
Yes, I'm really very happy to introduce to you Idil Efe. She is a diversity agent and curator at the Berlin City Museum, Stadtmuseum Berlin. She's curator in Berlin and the World Exhibition in the Humboldt Forum in Berlin, especially for aspects of open spaces. Based on her professional experiences, she has an expertise in the subspaces of gender and faith, and talk about how the Humboldt Forum project is perceived in the city and which areas of conflict it addresses. So I'm really very happy that you're here. Thank you very much for having accepted our invitation. And then I'm also very happy to be able to introduce to you Seraina Rohrer. She's head of the Innovation and Society sector and member of the Executive Committee of the Swiss Art Council of Pro Helvetia. She studied journalism, communication studies, film studies, and IT at the University of Zurich, and earned a PhD at the University of Zurich and UCLA in California, UCLA University. Seraina Rohrer has worked in Switzerland and abroad as a cinema festival director, Solothurner Filmtage. I think most of you know that, and she's also curator and an independent journalist. So thank you very much, Seraina, for joining us this evening.
So I suggest we start with a few opening questions, and I'll start with you, Rebecca. So we approached you over 2 years ago now with a very simple question. Simple questions are good, answers are often complicated. What could a feminist and truly inclusive museum look like? What could it be? And you did a lot of research, many interviews. We've produced masterclasses together. We're going to publish a toolkit very soon, and I think it becomes very clear in the entire research and in everything you've done that museums are predominantly white, male, and individualistic. So perhaps as an opening statement, perhaps you could briefly unpack that for us. What does it mean? And in the context of this evening's conversation, how do you connect feminism with other questions related to diversity and inclusion?
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this masterclass. And I'm so disappointed not to be with you today, but considering like the germs that I'm carrying right now, I think it's all the best for you that I'm not around so that you don't catch anything. And So thank you for letting me, like, in any case, participate in this debate. So you asked me two questions. How do we unpack the fact that museums are patriarchal and white and individualistic? And the second question, how do we connect feminism to diversity and inclusion? I'm going to start with the second one, which is the easiest one. Feminism is nothing if we don't consider diversity and inclusion. We can only talk about intersectional feminism, and other type of feminism should not be considered feminism. It should be considered as conservatism, as we can see it's what's happening in the US right now, for instance. So we cannot talk about feminism without this diversity perspective. The second thing that you said, that the museum is white, male, individualistic, it means that if we don't acknowledge the power and if we don't acknowledge politics within museum, we actually are being really patriarchal. And it means that an absence of a feminist and an inclusive strategy within the museum actually reinforces the patriarchal society. So I think it's based on this observation that you and I, Pascal, decided that we should do something. We should do something about it. And at first, I don't think you did, and I really did not understand what type of work was going to be ahead of us. And what we discovered is that it actually exists a community of researchers, of curators, of museum professionals that really work for a feminist museology or a feminist strategy of conducting and developing museum. So I would say that I'm just going to start with saying some kind of the definition that we created out of this feminism, diversity, and the museum perspective. So we would say that a feminist and inclusive museum is a place of power that finds itself as such, and whose mission, and we'll see, I guess, a bit after, is to demasculinize and decolonize the heritage and participate in the process of legitimizing some kind of avant-garde social subjects, such as gender equality that we did this year. And it involves several things that we're going to talk a little bit further more tonight. But I just wanted to start with this and to have this definition, to create this definition. We worked for 2 years, so we had a 6-month research, and I had the opportunity to read have an exhaustive list of literature, what was written about feminist museums. Then I had a 6-month period about interviewing people, then about 6 months doing the master classes, and 6 months writing the toolkit that we are preparing at the moment. And what I really love about our collaboration is that, Pascal, you actually understand that researching a thing takes some time. And so there it is.
Well, thanks for that. I think it's a very clear and useful opening statement. Denise?
Yes, thank you very much, Rebecca. And I would like to ask you, Idil, a question. And your job title at the Stadtmuseum Berlin is Diversity Agent. Is something that I have seen in a couple of museums now in Germany. Is something that it's not known yet in Switzerland, as far as I know. How long has this function existed, and why did the need arise to create such a position?
I work in a project that is funded by the federal state of Germany, and for the first time they funded a project in which they gave us money for 39 institutions Germany-wide, not only museums, there are courses and there's theaters and libraries who also participate in this project. And we 39 diversity agents had the opportunity to diversify the museum on 3 levels: personnel, programming, and audience. This was our task, and the need arose in Germany because Germany now, slowly but surely, comes to understand that it's a migrant country. Berlin has 35% of foreigners and people with a migrational background, as we say in Germany, which is not the highest number you can get for a city in Germany. Frankfurt has 75%, 73% of youngsters, children under the age of 6, who have a so-called migrational background. So the demographics is changing. And with the demographics changing, the audience changes. And respectively, the people who will be working and will be paying and will be funding these institutions will change slowly but slowly. And with that, the themes will change. So anticipating these changes, the German federal government found it necessary, and we're the first one to actually experience what it means to come into high culture institutions as so-called diversity agents. And I can tell you, for the last 3 years, I'm the second generation, so to say, the one before me that started a year earlier. It's very difficult, very demanding, and a lot of, how should I say that? It takes a lot of resilience to even sustain in that job, because you're exposed to many, many structural conflicts, but also a lot of biases, prejudgments, and conflict. Conflict along any step you make. It's conflictuous and it takes a long time, but it's good, because now we can recruit onto this experience and be more specific on what needs to be done for the years to come.
So you were talking about anticipating changes, which I think is a very interesting idea. Seraina, you're in a very interesting position to anticipate changes within the cultural sector in Switzerland, because Pro Helvetia is, of course, not only about museums, it's about many, many, many other forms and shapes of culture. How do you see different areas of culture in Switzerland connecting to this theme of diversity, or what is the overall question? What's the common pattern you could identify at this given point in time?
Well, I guess one challenge is what you just described, that everyone realized that it will not remain the same. In Switzerland, we have there 38% of the population with migratory background, so also very high numbers. Things are changing. Inclusion is a right, especially by organizations that are funded by the state. We should not discriminate. It's really written in the law. So we realized for cultural organizations to change, it's really difficult, what you just described. So one program we have is really accompanying organizations that work in culture to really fund that process. They have to match with an expert. In Switzerland, experts for diversity in culture are a rare thing to find. It's really not an established job profile yet. And the goal is really to enter into a transformational process where our cultural institutions become more inclusive. And the goal is really to have tailor-made offers for each institution, because maybe one institution is more interested in reaching, in developing aspects of the migrational society. Another institution might be really interested in decolonizing its collection. Yet another institution is really interested in reaching out to people with the socioeconomic background and including them in their structure. So it's really tailor-made. They can apply, the organizations can apply, and then really have a process funded over 2-3 years where they have time, because this is a huge problem in cultural organizations. You never have time because you always have to deliver, where you get time, expertise, which is, we are at the beginning, and you really get a chance to share with others who do make the same experience, and really also exchange on the difficulties, because a diversity process is never simple. It's always filled with emotions and obstacles.
Thank you very much for your comments, Seraina. Rebecca, you have come up with 10 practical questions any museum can ask themselves to become inclusive and diverse. We will soon publish a toolkit, as Pascal mentioned before, together with the Red Cross and the Red Crescent Museum, and I am really looking forward to it because I hope it will give us all also some ideas and concrete examples of things that we can do and implement. Here is a question for you all. How are museums places of power, and why is it important to acknowledge it? So what can we do as an institution of power if we are in terms of diversity?
Well, one of the researchers that I interviewed for the research, her name is Julie Bott, and she told me this sentence that I really think sum it up. She says that the museum is the embodiment of a very legitimate and very official and very dominant discourse. So by saying that, what she's saying is that museums are environments where choices are made about what can or cannot enter collective memory. And these are institutions that actually legitimize heritage. It means that in 25 years from now, what people are going to see about what culture that we have today and the values that we have as a society are being decided right now. This is why museums are very powerful institutions. And if we look, I'm not going to tell you the museum definition defined by the ICOM because it's very long and a bit boring, but it's quite useful. But it has, those 4 missions about acquiring, conserving, studying, exhibiting, and transmitting the tangible and intangible heritage. And those missions tells us how important and how powerful the museum is today. Another person that I wanted to quote is Alayo Akinkugbe, that we had the chance to welcome at the Red Cross Museum in September, October, or November, well, early on in 2021. And she said, museums are, from my point of view, places of change, places that encourage reflection. And I thought it was a very joyful and very optimistic vision of what museums are. Because when we talk about museum in the general society, people tend to think that, those are really very old institution, a bit boring, too big to be changed, and all those stereotypes that we have about museums. But what happens is that, as Pascal said earlier, what happens in society is being discussed in the museum. And the reason is very simple. It's because what makes museum first and foremost are the people who are working for the institution. So this is why I think museums are very powerful.
How do you both associate the idea of power with museums?
Well, as it has been said, museums are constructing collective identities and constructing history. And they canonize what is going to be important for us in the future. That's one thing. And the other thing is the museum right now is also struggling with its own definition. There is this debate, the ICOM, as you said, museums are spaces, or this is what some museum makers wanted to become, are spaces of multivocality, of multi-perspectivity, because in plural societies, constructing history is not going to be an easy task anymore. We are not living off of master narratives. We have very challenging narratives side by side, which are all legitimate, and will have to come together in one way or the other to be representative of what is truthfully happening. And we are not in the business, and we have no precedence on how to do that. Museums play a key role in it, because they are one of the institutions who do and construct realities who are acknowledged. I mean, there are realities, but which realities are being acknowledged and which will be canonized and will lead to a future and thus will develop society on a very large scale. And this is why they're very, very powerful, acknowledging it or not.
Maybe I can share a personal experience in my work. When we do these calls for projects, we had very few submissions by museums. And I would say the fewest from all organizations. And also the submissions we got, they were very much focused on the third P, the public, and they didn't include a reflection on their personnel or their staff, neither or on their program often. And I think this is really where a museum has to take a closer look. What are my structures? Who makes the program? What is the interaction with the public? What's the participation degree? And also, how do I engage in creating that narrative of the future? And I think there is a huge shift to be done from this authorical approach where you say this is good, to this I would like to put on a table for a dialogue. And the questioning, the questioning as a collective and the invitation to question together, I think will be a key competence of a curator in the future, much more than knowing what quality is or having a high degree in art education or whatever. I think that will be so much more important. I think there is a huge lack still in Switzerland because this notion of what a museum is and where you need to bring about change is really there. We need to work on that.
Just out of curiosity, what type of organizations sent in the most submissions?
Theater places, companies, theater companies that are really open to these questions. One very good example in Zurich is Gessnerallee. They really have they changed their whole structure. They changed their way of doing the program. But we really noticed a lot of performing arts institutions, organizations, a lot of institutions that have maybe not had this authority for such a long time, smaller organizations also, but slowly but surely it's really changing. In the last call we had, there were bigger institutions and starting to have bigger institutions, and also with notions that go beyond, I just want to reach out to a new public and engage new audiences to grow my outreach, and so it's starting really to change, I feel.
Okay, so if we now take it a step further and we acknowledge the fact that museums are places of power and that we get to decide what goes into collective memory, then it gets really daunting because you have to make these decisions, and you know what you know, but you surely don't know what you don't know. So how do we work on identifying our biases, and how can that be proactively integrated in the process? Anybody wants to jump in?
I really would like to jump in right here. Because one of the key areas that I took upon myself to work on when I started in the City Museum was the diversifying of the personnel. Because when people have... I'll just tell you a little anecdote. Before I started working in the Stadtmuseum, in the City Museum of Berlin, I did with another curator, we did a project on pictures from a Turkish photographer who had come right after the wall had come down and photographed the Turkish community. The largest outside of Turkey is in Berlin. And it's huge. And these pictures that he had taken were a little scrutinized in terms of, what is the quality of that? Photographic quality. That they had historical value because he had photographed people and situations that we had nothing about. And as we were doing this project, and the personnel that I didn't know at that time, when we came a little closer and they opened up to me, one of them, who is now not working with us because retired, said, honestly, we didn't want to leave the foreigners out of the museum. We simply didn't think of them. So when you don't have certain realities as your life reality, when you're not part of it, when you don't touch it in any corner of your life, then it simply doesn't exist. When it doesn't exist, you can have an exhibition in the city of Berlin where, 35% have a migrational background, the Turkish community, the Polish community being one of the biggest, and that theme is represented in the history of Berlin with 2 posters. right? I mean, 2 posters. One of them is a girl, a Turkish girl, about the age of 12 with a Turkish folklore costume. And that is just representing what's happening in practice. And I do understand it's not meant to be exclusive. It's just not, when the personnel is not well equipped and has no competences in diversity, in discriminatory action, or in social fields, then it's not going to happen. Not because they're intentionally doing it. It's just not on their frame. They cannot see it.
Rebecca, on this point, we've talked about we've talked about this together so many times. How important it was to make mistakes, and how important it was also to see ourselves as learning institutions, and not only institutions that lecture. Perhaps making mistakes and being open about the process of learning is one way of better identifying our biases.
And actually, it reminds me of the definition that we heard about what diversity is in the Cambridge Dictionary, right? They say that, if I remember, that diversity means, like, one of the definition is to include different people. And what was interesting in that definition is that it still is written by the very same person that at the very beginning are excluding the people. Because it should not be about including something. It should be about deconstruct oneself, acknowledge one's privileges, and then work on that, so that we should not talk at some point about feminism or diversity. And I think it's actually the work that we're trying to do. Like, we should all, as member of society, deconstruct ourselves so that those type of things that you just mentioned should not happen anymore. And of course, when you deconstruct oneself, you make mistakes because nobody's perfect. And people all grew up with some privileges, some way more than others. And to deconstruct myself means to acknowledge the existence of those privileges, and then acknowledge the fact that one should not have those anymore. So of course, in the process, it means making mistakes. And making mistakes is actually quite not really well accepted, I would say, in the museum world. Everything should be very political and very smooth. And I think this is something that we should all work on as museum professionals. We should acknowledge the fact that museums are going to make mistakes if they want to be more diverse.
Institutions?
I think making a mistake is a huge taboo in not only in museums. I think it holds true for other domains, and this is why I believe that when you enter in a process of change, you really need to have a backup with your leadership. If you we notice that if the will for change only comes from the staff and the leaders, in the end, they really don't want to change, and there's no commitment. Each mistake is like a proof of failure, and I think for these processes, it's really important that you, as a leader, going through a development like that, are really resilient when it comes to mistakes, and really saying, okay, there's no checklist for to become more diverse and to become more inclusive. We have to develop it ourselves. It will only be good if we do it ourselves, and then really tolerate these mistakes and live with them. But I really observe that this is huge. I mean, this is a point where it often doesn't work.
Yeah.
If I may add something, there's one thing on a personal level to deal with diversity, but I think that institutions can do a whole lot more. For instance, you can invest into your personnel by offering seminars, diversity seminars. This is what we're doing. Our personnel now for the last year had the opportunity to be sensitized in terms of diversity, transcultural communication, Nonviolent communication, very important, oftentimes in very hierarchical or very high esteemed institutions. There is a lot of violence and power on a verbal level. We don't acknowledge that. This comes along with hierarchies, and or anti-racism, or even empowerment for BPOC people, so they are more resilient within those structures, so we can have them stay there to be also leaders in changing it, because they're the ones who take the burden of having to live with what's happening there. And while doing that, I often don't like to talk about mistakes so much, but about practices. Often I say, let's practice it. And what we do is, for instance, when we recruit people, we ask them, we interview them on their diversity competences. That doesn't mean that we expect them to have these competences fully, but we want to see if they're willing to grow on this issue, if they're accepting, do they have an idea of who they are, and if they have an idea that there is a difference, and can they still create empathy along beyond these differences, and do they have the tolerance to stand when things are ambiguous? Can you hold it? That's very important, to be capable of going through conflict. And these are competences that we really ask for when we hire people now. And we've been doing this for a year, and it did make a change, and did make a difference in the personnel that we got, but also in the people who interviewed them, because they had to practice it just as much. And acknowledging that we're all learning at the same time on different levels in different ways, it makes it more fun, and it makes it more tolerable to do those so-called mistakes.
Thank you very much for all these topics that you mentioned. I'm very really thankful for that. You mentioned mistakes, the courage to have the courage to make mistakes, and to empower also people for change. And you also mentioned the fact that what we don't know, it's not there. And that brings me to the next topic that we want to discuss this evening, and it's the audience. So in involving the audience has also to do with, I would say, courage, or you have to face a possibility of mistake, because you don't know what the audience or the public or the people that could participate to a project that will bring to you. So the question is for you all: should audiences play a more active role in the decisions made regarding content and heritage at museum? And if yes, why? Is it important in terms of inclusion and diversity? And maybe you also know a couple of examples of how can it be done. I don't know, Rebecca?
Sure. Among those 10 ideas that we suggest to museums to become more professional, we suggest to consider the audience as a fountain of interpretative possibilities, meaning that they're not considered as passive people who are here to receive knowledge, but to co-construct the knowledge that we produce within a museum. So my answer is yes, obviously, but as I am not on the field, I would say it's quite easy to say yes and not do it on the field. So I'm sure that you guys are going to have great examples about how we can build something with the audience.
The exhibition in the Humboldt Forum Berlin Global, which is an exhibition of the Stadtmuseum, was primarily done on the principle of participatory work on very, very different levels. And all the things that I curated with participants from the city. That doesn't mean that you make it open and everyone can come and deliver the ideas and we do it, but it means that you are going into a process of collaboration. There is a certain set of ideas that we come with and offer to a number of people, institutions, and ask them if they want to work with us. And then we negotiate on the terms on which we will work. And this is always a difficult moment. There is one who's working in the museum, and then you're asking people in the field who do a lot of other things in their daily lives, but not museum, to participate. And this takes time. We underestimate the time it takes to create relationships and trust and openness. And I can just tell you one thing. It's one of my favorite stories. I was curating the room Faith, and I was working with 3 women, and we had this workshop where we talked about good and bad experiences in Berlin alongside the theme of faith. What were they experiencing? And they drew the stories, and then they started talking about it. And one of them, and as they were talking, I started crying. And I was totally embarrassed. That's not professional. You just don't do that, right? And I couldn't hold myself. And I was just like, oh my God, this is, if I knew I, get myself into this kind of mode, I might have not done it. But in the end, we all cried, and then we laughed, and the ice was broken. And we were the power women, and we had so much fun working together. Every encounter was like a party, and they did great work, and we're still friends. And it's amazing once you break that ice. But when you try to be very professional, and when you don't touch or be touched, then there's no relationship possible, and you won't get the stories, you won't develop together ideas. It's not my ideas, we develop things together at a certain point. You come with a set of ideas, but then you let them go. And that takes time, and it takes money, by the way. Mm-hmm. That too.
Yeah, we are aware of that.
Absolutely.
Seraina?
Yeah, I think the key word has been said a couple of words. I think it's really about partnering up. The public or your audience is as much of a partner than other museums, and this understanding or notion of the public being a partner can really be a great point of departure, be it for a dialogue, be it for really collaborating on an exposition. And as you said, you might define a community you would like to work with, and say, I would like to work with these people, and this will of course have so much more credibility. You will have different angles, and you will learn in the process yourself of how things can be done differently. There are some examples that I think in Switzerland are quite inspiring. One is in the historic museum in Bern. They wanted to include more refugees in their public, and they constructed a program where refugees selected the objects that they wanted to show, and they also guide the people through the exposition. So it's really a very personal take on this exposition, and it's a co-creation, partnering up that has really brought out new perspective, new questions to a collection that has been there and existing, but just knowing that an object might be considered so differently from a different perspective can be very enriching. Another example that I really like is from the Alpine Museum in Bern also. They wanted to do a collection on alpinism, female alpinism, and they realized that they didn't have so many objects. I mean, the objects are kind of banal, really simple. So they asked all of the visitors, the female visitors, to contribute to the collection and to contribute with oral testimonials. So the exhibition is actually growing with it taking place, and their collection is growing because they have new objects entering. I think projects like that can be quite interesting also because the engagement is so much higher, and the feeling of being taken seriously can be very enriching.
So let me share with you a very practical example of a dilemma I had to face, and I would be curious to know how you would have handled it, surely much better than I did. It was with my son. He's about to turn 13, and we walked into the museum, and when you walk into the museum, there's a huge sentence engraved on the wall, which was put there by the founder of the museum, which is very strong and beautiful. To him, it was really the best expression of his humanitarian engagement as a Red Cross delegate throughout the world. And it's written in French, it's written chacun est responsable de tout devant tous. So everyone is responsible for everything before everyone else. So no pressure. But anyway, a way of saying your problems are also my problems, because we're human beings. And after this long process of learning about gender and diversity and inclusion, just one day it really struck us as a team that we could add a few letters to make it much more inclusive, because in most Latin languages, as you know, the male way of writing prevails over the feminine way of writing words. So we just added a few letters, chacun, chacune, tous, toutes. And this is a way for our audience to be aware of the performative nature of words. Of course, we know that this was written in the 19th century. We contextualize it, we do all of that. But it's just a way of, suddenly thinking. So I pitch all of that to my son. Okay, we're walking. And he says, yeah, cool, Dad. Yeah, I get the point. But actually, you're excluding me. So, whoa, okay, what's going on? Well, because I'm dyslexic. So it's much more difficult for me to read this now. What would you have said? It's a tough one, huh?
Well, we don't have it in German, so...
Okay, cool.
In Turkish, we don't have gender, so we don't have the generic masculine.
Can we get it right for everybody all the time at every level?
I don't think so. One needs to make choices. And this is what you had said. It depends on the context. What is it that I want to work on? What makes sense in certain contexts? And language could be one part in certain contexts, and others it might not be. So I would really, when I start working, and I don't know your context, so I wouldn't be able to solve your problem. But the thing is, I would really like to see a committedness to certain aspects, because once you do them right, you're already signaling this. I have that on my, I have it on my consciousness. I understand. I might not have all the solutions at the right time or pleasing everyone, but I am aware of it. And that alone sets a tone. That alone is a certain invitation for people who understand, okay, here this is an institution who has an awareness, who's dealing with things. And the best one, I don't know for you, but we use the asterisks in Turkish, in German, for all, and I don't care which sign you use, because we are not in a binary world anymore. I mean, Google counts like 60 gender identities, and I feel like every day it's becoming more. And Magnus Hirschfeld was counting like over 3,000. And new studies show the whole idea of gender, bipolar gender order is not functioning. It's not even scientifically proven. So what you can do is you can't include 60 different gender identities. I mean, this would be impossible, but you can set signs of saying, I do acknowledge that we're not in a binary world anymore. And yes, if you're diverse, there is a gap for you, or there is an asterisk for you, or whatever. Because you just, as an institution, show, I'm conscious of this.
Mm. Rebecca, what would you have done behind your...
Honestly, I think it's a really tough one. I think regarding this issue, it's something that we take really seriously with the inclusive language transformation of the French language. As you know, it's probably one of the more sexist and patriarchal language that exists in the whole world. So it's a bit more complicated. But I think that I'm not saying something wrong when I say that study shows that the inclusive language with the dot in the middle, I'm not sure how we say it in English, is actually not problematic for people who are dyslexic. And so maybe do not add other words, but just include this way of writing.
I would like to go a step forward and speak about museums as companies. Mm-hmm. What does it mean to be or to have or to integrate diversity as a company? So we have spoken about our program, the possibility to exhibitions, etc., the possibility to integrate also the ideas of the audience. But what does it mean as an employer? Museums also have a responsibility within their own institution. Structural change is important, and I think it's kind of the first step, that you have to be ready for that, ready to experiment change, to change structure, to support and welcome diversity. Yeah, are museums, do they have the same challenges than other institutions, or are museums maybe different in terms of management and organizational structure? And what responsibility do they have as a cultural institution in terms of inclusion and diversity? And maybe here, before you answer, I would like to also mention for the audience, maybe not everybody knows that it has, you mentioned ICOM before, and there is a really global discussions since many years now about a new definition of what the role is of museums in the world, and what's their mission should be. There was a voting in Kyoto in 2019, and the community, the world community of the museums, wasn't able to decide about a new definition of museums. This year in August in Prague, there will be a voting again, and then probably it will be, this time it will be okay. What's interesting is in the proposal for the new museums definition, there are 3 words are there: inclusion, diversity, and participation. So if the voting will be positive in this summer in Prague, that means that all the museums that are members of the ICOM, so the International Council of Museums, they will have to work on that, also on these 3 words: inclusion, diversity, and participation. So we really have a responsibility. Yes, how do you see the responsibility of museums as companies, as employers in their structure? Yeah. Who wants to go first?
I can maybe start. I think you need to ask yourself, what do I want to be? Do I want to reflect the society within my structure? And then first of all, you need to know who works here already. And in the meantime, it has become quite easy to gather this data with anonymous surveys. So a lot of employers don't even know who works here, what kind of background do their collaborators have, socioeconomic, gender identity, and so on. So I think this is a first question that you need to ask yourself as a company and as an employer. The second thing is really to set certain goals, I think. What do we want? Because it's not enough to include one person, because the risk of tokenism and just burdening all of these questions on one person is huge. So you really need to commit to several changes. This is, of course, much easier for bigger organizations because you have more staff, you have more employees, you have more turnover in the company. So it's sometimes extremely hard for really very small organizations, which are very common also in culture. And there you need to maybe test other models. But then it's really a question of how do I recruit? What are my goals? And how do I value competences? And I really share what you think, what you said previously, that we always ask for expertise, degrees, but diversity competence is very hard to know. What is it exactly? What do we require? And how do we value it within a CV? And within the recruitment process, starting from the announcing an open job to the recruitment, the conversation you have, that you really have a standardized conversation about diversity and the competences that are included. And it really goes from there, and it's never a quick win, but it will be a win on the long or medium run, I'd say.
Yeah, I'd like to add a couple of things to that, because most museums that I know are publicly funded, meaning that they, in their structure, are not very agile. So it's very strict. There are rules and things in place that you, as a museum, cannot change by yourself. That's one thing. You have to acknowledge that. You have to understand, for instance, when we recruit people, we are obliged to ask for certain degrees. We can only negotiate with the Gewerkschaften, the unions, to change that. So it's highly political. Who gets to work in the institution? What preconditions do they have to bring along? When you talk about the new ICOM definition, these are other skill sets. Mm-hmm. And we don't have degrees for these skill sets. How do we get these people with the knowledge, with the expertise? You know, they are not academics. You don't learn in art history to be diverse, inclusive, and so on. That's one thing. The other thing is the institutions themselves need to ask themselves, what kind of work environment do I want to offer? How am I going to work? Are my teams working collaboratively? Is it what I want to pursue outside? Can I internally start translating that into my own workflows? And that would mean a whole organizational change. This costs money, this costs time, and it really puts people on the spot. They become insecure. Changes always mean that people are stressed out, you know, while they're doing their normal jobs. They still have to do their exhibitions, they still have to do their program. And on top of it, you come in with these changes and ask them for totally new skill sets. So as an employer, as a company, if you want to do that, what we're doing right now is we have organizational developers in the house. We buy them, and they're practicing with us new work models. We call it agile working. I know public institutions will never work like a company. This is just not in the cards. But one can try out certain techniques. Try out, you know, what would work well for certain groups, like outreach and or programming. Could they be adapting some of these new models of working? And could you slowly change the work environment and the working conditions? On top, the institution really needs to know what value systems they are working with. That is totally important. There needs to be an acknowledgement and a demand for certain conduct and ethical norms that are put in place, which are not to be crossed. And we've been doing this, and we have code of ethics, and we will develop a code of conduct out of it. And these processes are taking time. It's really, again, none of what we're saying is to be had in 1 or 2 or 3 years' time. It's just not in the cards. I always say 15 years minimum. And then you practice, and maybe in 20 years there's a certain, you know, self-rolling moment. But yeah.
Rebecca, how could we speed things up? Less than 15 years.
Well, I was going to say the same thing as Idil and Seraina just said. I remember something that Susanna Peterson, that we interviewed with Pascal. She's the director of the National Swedish Museum, right? And she told us something very striking and interesting, is that we could actually see the people of color and the white people representing the same level of hierarchies in some museums. And I'm speaking as a French person, it's especially true in France. It's like you can see at the entrance the people welcoming you who are people of color, and the same way the warders, I'm thinking it's the word, would be also people of color. And then when you go in the offices, then you would have more and more white people. And she thought a lot about how we can change this dynamic, because it's not okay to recreate the dynamic that we have in society within the museum. And at that point, if I remember well, she talked about how British Museum managed to do it. And it's funny because, Idil, you mentioned this earlier, most museums are funded by public subsidies. So it's actually the state that should say that the subsidy would go on if museums make internal structural change to make this not happening anymore. And this is what the Department of Culture did in the UK. And so they had to do it. They had to be innovative about developing internal strategy to make this hierarchy not a reality anymore. And I think they started 25 years ago. I'm not saying that it's perfect today, but it's better than France. Maybe we should look at what's happening over there.
So I'm aware of time. We're approaching the end of the conversation. We each have one concluding question. The one I wanted to ask is, surely there are many professionals, museum professionals, perhaps in the audience here at the museum tonight and online. If you could each give us one practical step that they could take tomorrow morning when they go back to work to make their museum more diverse and inclusive.
Oh, God.
Tomorrow morning.
Tomorrow morning.
I would say reflect on what your privileges are, and if you have experienced discrimination, and what kind of discrimination you might have experienced in your life. I think that's a good starting point, and maybe ask your colleague if he or feels privileged or not.
Okay. Rebecca, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, but I'm not sure it counts because as I said, I'm not on the field, so it's going to be quite easy to say, not so easy to do, but it would be give back the stolen artifact that we have in Western museums to where they belong.
Tomorrow morning, huh? What about you?
I will touch another aspect. All of this is true, but actually this is something that I'll be doing. So create a network of people that will affiliate with you and create relationships and be in touch with them. Like, for instance, just one example, I've gotten in touch with the Turkish-German radio station or with other institutions that are coming from a post-migrational perspective, and we're collaborating right now on certain programs and events. They distribute that for us, so we're becoming closer, we have conversations, and I'm hoping that out of this will grow a relationship where we will have more opportunity to work together.
Thank you very much, and I'm really happy that we are starting a collaboration this evening, and it's really central, because last year I was kind of lost, like with the question, what is this? How can we do it? And I think the first step is really to speak with people and try to connect and build the possibilities, or give to everybody the possibility to speak about it, just to understand what it means. It's kind of the first step. I also have a conclusive question for you. If you had a magic wand and could change one thing in museums right now regarding inclusion and diversity, what would it be?
It's a magic wand, so it will happen, it will work. What could it be?
Let's say I would speed up the process. And let's say tomorrow morning we will have an inclusive museum.
Perfect. Okay.
Wonderful.
I probably would use my magic wand to take away the notion of that all of these themes are so radically hard to come by and are we're so afraid of these themes. I would really like people to engage in these processes with a lot of fun and a lot of curiosity and a lot of creative, crazy ideas, and just play with it. Start playing with it. Be critical. Do fight, and don't be afraid to open up your mouth and voice yourself and demand things if necessary, and just be more playful and open about the whole thing.
Perfect. Rebecca?
I would say end up patriarchy, so that it would be a good application for museums and other institutions as well.
Well, perfect end to this conversation. Thank you so much for everything we've discussed. I would now like to open the floor to questions here in the audience at the museum and online. Any questions?
Yes, maybe just one practical thing. There is a microphone going around, so wait for the microphone before you ask the question. And we will switch between questions from the audience here and questions that I become here on the tablet.
Okay, I think I did a great job. I waited for the microphone. First of all, also thank you from my side. I found the talk very, very interesting, and also for my job, because I am a diversity agent at the Schauspielhaus Zürich. Like, I think a lot of things that have been said here are definitely applicable to the theater scene. And just like one question about, maybe it's a bit of a concrete, like very specific question, but that I dealt with is what are good strategies or best practices when you are confronted with like a considerable amount with resistance? Because one of the first things I said when I started a job is that I will not be wasting my energy, or will not be focusing my energy on the people who are like categorically saying they don't want to be part of the journey. But then again, you still need to figure out on a legal level, on a contractual level, and on just you know, it's a huge institution, but you need to figure out what can we do, or what do we do with the people that are really resisting and not even going to the workshops. Like things like that happened.
Work on those who want to go along with you, create a critical amount of people, a community, and put them into the center. And then there's one thing that people don't go along, and then there is another thing when people resist and work against you. So you have to have your backing from the top. You have to have enough critical people in the middle management, and then you have to have structures in place where you meet discrimination, where you meet sexism and so on, and that should be legally put on paper as policy in your institution. In Germany we have the AGG, Allgemeine Gleichbehandlungsgesetz. It calls for a position in the institution where people can go to when they feel discriminated or whatever. You have to have these things in place to have the force against it. There's one thing when people don't go along. It's another thing when people are working against you. And that you have to somehow get out of the way, if this is the policy of the house.
Yeah, definitely. So we started doing, we've written, it still has to be verneemlast. What's the English word for that? Hasn't been put in place, but we've written a règlement for the protection of people's integrity. And so this is definitely there. And I think that we are in a good way to kind of have the structures or the context around resistance. It was just more of a, no, basically, you answered the question. Everything's perfect. Sorry.
All right.
I have a question here on the tablet, and then we will go on with the questions in the audience. One of the questions is how much, and it's for all three of you, how much have each one of you been attacked by someone who, for example, takes the position that gender equality gender question in language are obsolete, looking for inclusion is overdone, a waste of time, money, etc.?
Rebecca?
I would say all of them, I think. Well, I did wrote a letter to the French Academy of the French language so that they would change the rules. So, you know, I did not ask for it because that would not be very feminist of me to say, but they told me that I was really young and very naive about this matter. But there is a very strong group of white men working against the fact that we should make the language more inclusive. And this very fact makes us understand that we are on the right path. So we will go on and do that.
Well, I get it from time to time on different levels, but by now the critique or the attack, it's not so obvious, one has to say. It comes in the undercurrent. It comes en passant, so to say. And but when you have a critical mass in an institution who's committed to these processes, and when the top, the directorial level, and some of the bottom-ups and some in the middle management are backing these processes, then it really, I'm fine. I mean, they can say things and it just doesn't touch me anymore. In the beginning, it was hard. I have to say, coming into institutions with these things is hard. It takes a lot of resilience. But once you know that you have a backing, you have people who are like-minded, it is very empowering. And yeah, it doesn't happen that often anymore, I have to say.
Obviously, in funding, there's a big debate, and it often goes, or the reproach is often, so do you want diversity or do you want quality in art? And this is really something be it sometimes in exchanges that I hear. And I'm so convinced that we will have more quality by more diversity, that these kind of attacks don't shy me away. On the contrast, it reaffirms me, and I try. I mean, I just go ahead and I draw from the positives, because you always also get a lot of positive affirmation, and I just try to focus on that and put the rest in my brain that will forget.
Buonasera. How do we achieve and include the audience, which is very, very far away from gender, migration or diversity issue? How do we avoid to feed the splitting of the society?
An easy one.
Find common themes. I mean, we are different, but we have a lot of things in common as well. And seek out these commonalities alongside the differences we have, be in allegiances on certain issues and themes, and there won't be any polarization, because at the core, most people are driven by very similar things, even though they come from different walks of life.
Of course, I agree with you, but I want to reach the evangelical church, the people that voted for abortion in the USA. That's my target. I want to conceive them that their reality is different. How can I achieve this part of people? Quite a different.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if museums are in the business of convincing people of things that, you or I or someone else believes. The question is, can you facilitate a conversation about it? Can you be in exchange? And that you can do with programming. Invite people. Create a safe space so people are safe when they talk about it. But when you do, and there are certain rules in place, you can invite them and have a conversation, public or private or whichever. And this is already making a step towards reaching out. Whether or not you will be able to convince them, it's not up to you, it's up to them to really either take it or not. I mean, there's just so much power that each and everyone has. And we're not in the business of wanting to convince people of things that they don't want to be convinced of. But we can have a conversation about it.
For me, I think the institution and the long-standing institution that has such an acknowledgement with the wide population, for example, Landesmuseum, when I was a kid, for me, the Landesmuseum was a place where you would look at weapons, and I knew it was mostly visited by SVP, so they were really right. And for me, it was out of my imagination that I would be sitting here maybe 35 years later and speaking about diversity, and also going to expositions now at Landesmuseum. I see so much more than weapons and costume that male soldiers used to dress up. And I think sometimes an established institution can be really a great asset in this diversity dialogue, in bringing together different publics, because I am sure the resistance to go into a really new place where, you know, it's only reserved for very progressive idea, is the resistance will be so much more. Whereas if you have a museum who has a long-standing tradition and who had as a public also a rather conservative side, this is really a chance in your diversity dialogue, because you can really reach out to a much wider audience than you can do when you're just a progressive space of a community.
Rebecca, do you want to add something to that?
I think what you both said is very interesting, and I saw this thing today on the internet. The fact that Fox News in the US had to show legally the trial about what happened on the 6th of January. And at that point, 700,000 people decided to change the channel so that they would not face this reality. So even if Fox News cannot change their point of view, it's hard to ask museum to do the same. But as we said before, we do know that museums have power, and this power is to create new values for our society. We are living, as we all know here, very weird times, I would say, polarizing time where people are for or against, they do not want to debate and so on. And I think that museums, by inviting, as Seraina and Idil said, inviting people from different point of view to debate within the institution is a first step to do so. But let's not put too much pressure on museums as well.
For that.
Yeah, thank you.
Other questions? There's one in the audience here.
I'm wondering about digitalization. In your experience, how do you see digitization as a tool to work with you for the future? And could you tell a few examples?
Well, when we were thinking about Berlin Global, I had this program. I thought we should digitally be connected with other museums and do programs together in 2 different parts of the world and take up issues and have performances and be part. This is a big dream. It costs a lot of money, I've been told, and so on and so forth. But what we can do is we've already worked with people from outside of Germany on programs. Like, for instance, our new exhibition that will be opening on the 7th of next month, the Gestaltung, the design of it was done by a Turkish architect, and we digitally conferred with one another, we exchanged, and so on and so forth. I mean, our scope is much larger now. It has its moments where it becomes difficult, but we can be more connected if we really want to be. You know, we can work across cultures and spaces, and all this is possible if your museum is modern enough to provide you with laptops and internet and so on and so forth.
Maybe I can add something. We are reflecting on, because of the experience that you have made during the pandemic, and then we saw with virtual guided tours that we have implemented, that there is an audience out there that is interested in our content and that is not here in Switzerland or cannot come to Switzerland, but we just realized that there is an audience out there that we can reach. And here we are reflecting on the question of, can digital transformation or forms of a virtual museum help us reach out to people that are, for example, in hospitals, or that really have no possibility to come to the museums and be in our spaces? How can we reach them? And digitalization can help us there, I think.
And maybe also this evening, I mean, this discussion is transmitted you can connect online, and I think this is really, for a person who has obligations, care obligations, this is a way of not being out every evening, but either catching up or following just the dialogue on your headset, Or the same holds true for my mother, who has a physical handicap, and she always has to think, oh, is it worth coming, or can I just log in? And for people who have obstacles like that, it's also a very nice way of participating more and more easily, and not having to check, okay, is the entrance, and is it really that I can get into the institution, and so on. So this is already for me really a first step of including more people, making it a bit more flexible to follow up on this on these conversations.
And maybe another thing in terms of collections, right? I mean, you can digitalize them and you can put them for public display and discussion. I mean, you can really work with the public on a digital level by showing more of what you have in your archives and in your collections that you cannot put up always. And you can, what we had, for instance, during Corona time, we had a Berlin Now, that was a project where we asked people to digitally send in objects, impressions that they had from the time, Corona times, and what they wanted to be part of the collection. And we discussed that. And so we opened even the collecting in Corona times, we opened it up to collect the now with the broader public.
Yeah, we did the same, and I think it's also a great opportunity to walk the talk in terms of power and sharing power, acknowledging the fact that we can co-construct content, crowdsourcing it, and we have really co-created entire exhibitions and parts of our collection with online audiences, and then including all of that knowledge in the physical space of the museum, co-producing a film that's touring internationally with these audiences. And that's an authentic way, I find, of saying, you know what, we're more intelligent together, and I'm no better than you are, and thanks to this technology, we can actually think together. So it takes a lot of trust building and actually getting things done, but it's really worth the ride.
Other questions in the audience here? Okay. There is one question for you on the tablet, and maybe it's also a good way to end, because it could be a base for all of us for our work in the future. The toolkit has been mentioned that you are developing now with Rebecca. Will it and how be published, or will it be available?
Aha. So first we have to finish it, Rebecca. So that's the next step. And then it will be available after the summer. And we've thought a lot about this. It's going to be available in a digital format, so as to be very easily available. It's something we'll be able to download. And with Rebecca, with my colleagues, we've thought a lot about something that could be easily implemented in your daily work life. So the very concept of a toolkit resonates with that. We're also touching upon, you know, concepts of the 10 steps you can take, the checklist. I mean, to make it actually not a huge, complicated thing that is scary and you have to read everything until the very end, but actually just something that you can sit down and say, okay, that's one step, that's the other, and this is why it's important. And if I need more information, there's all of that here. But I think you were mentioning the fact before that actually just trying and doing things and not being scared about it, that's really what we wanted to touch upon. So it's a toolkit, it's digital, and it will be available after the summer.
Wonderful, and I think this is a good ending for this evening. It is a couple of minutes before 8. And I really want to thank you all, Rebecca, Idil, Seraina, for having been with us this evening. It was very, very interesting, very helping. Also, I think it's, we see how we can begin to work and to develop diversity in museums. And thank you very much to the audience here in the auditorium and to the audience online. It's a wonderful evening in Zurich this evening, so even more thank you for having been here inside. And outside we have an open air cinema this evening, so maybe spontaneously some of you maybe want to watch a movie this evening. It's a beautiful day, and really thank you, Pascal, for the collaboration. It was for us really beautiful to have you here and to make this bridge also between Geneva and Zurich, and I hope that we'll have the possibility to be in touch, all of us, in the future also.
I would really love that, and I wanted to thank you all for the nice conversation and really insightful moments we had, and yeah, thank you for your very insightful questions as well, because that again makes me think anew. So thanks for having me in Zurich.
Last word maybe from the others.
Rebecca, what's the evening like in Paris?
I don't know, I had to stay inside all day, but it seems fine from the outside. Thank you so much for thinking about this topic with us. And once again, I'm very sad I was not able to come and join this conversation physically, but I'm glad that this topic of conversation is becoming a common topic to talk about within museums. And it is the first step to make this topic something just normal to talk about. So thank you so much, and we will include the questions and your thoughts in the toolkit that will be published, yes, in September, as Pascal said. And the idea with the toolkit is not to, I just wanted to add one tiny thing, it's not to tell people and tell museums what to do, because we don't know what we should do, but just to give food for thought. And say, so this is happening, these are the questions that we're asking ourselves, these are ways to maybe solve those problems, but each museum should do their own thing and what they feel and what is good with their values and ethics, and I think it's the first thing. So thank you so much to all of you for this conversation. Thank you for the questions. Have a great.
And maybe if you can't wait until summer, end of summer, or you're stuck inside, I really recommend the guide Carnet Rose, or Rosa Heft, by the Festival Les Créatifs. You can also find it online, and it has a lot of very practical ideas for change, and it's not exclusively for museums, but it's really a great base to start the reflection on a very practical organizational level, and I really recommend that guide for as a summer reading until the best practices, the toolkit comes out.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again and have a great evening. Good night.
Thank you very much. Great evening.